All right, so last time we met on Sunday, Brian talked to us about chapter 14, and one of the things we saw there was, again, a recurrence of the 144,000 who are going to, I think, also show up here in chapter 15. I think it's the same crowd that's going to be described. But also, he talked about this harvest of the earth prior to these final plagues that are going to be discussed in chapter 16. So we're getting ready in chapter 15 for these 7 plagues, these 7 bowls of wrath is the way I've always referred to them. Some people say it's really not bowls, it's more like chalices or something like this. It's the better terminology, but I just say 7 containers, 7 bowls of wrath that are going to be poured out. And they, in many ways, run parallel or similar to the other series of 7 judgments that we've seen described already in the book. What was the first series of 7 judgments that sort of come from heaven to earth?
Seals.
The 7 seals. Remember, he receives the book from the right hand of the Ancient of Days. He's found worthy to open the scroll to execute, I suppose, the plans and purposes of the Father there. And so he begins breaking open the 7 seals. Would maybe seem to make sense that the 7 seals are not the contents of the book. You can't really read it until the seals are open. So each of these is sort of like giving you a preview of coming attractions, is I think Brian's way of putting it. And these are descriptions of terrible judgments that are being warned, that are being foreshadowed as on the horizon. And then out of the kind of the sort of like nesting nesting dolls, Russian nesting dolls, out of the 7th seal, we get another series of 7. And that's 7 what? Trumpets. And again, we kind of circle around some rather similar territory. Again, these are some, maybe fanfare is the right word to use for something like this, but these trumpet blasts are signaling that, again, something is coming and something not good is coming. These are warnings about what is about to unfold, and perhaps they are not to be thought of as 7 different things than the 7 seals, but a little bit different perspective on similar events, the coming judgment of God. And then now we're coming to this 3rd and final series of 7. And they're different in the sense that they don't seem to be like foreshadowings or warnings, but this seems to be more like the actual event itself is taking place under the description of these coming out of the temple. These angels come with their bowls of wrath to pour out on the earth. And so no more delay, no more warnings, no more opportunities even to turn or to offer up prayers. And we'll see that. I think there's even imagery for that. We're past the point of no return, and these judgments are imminent in the pouring out of these bowls. So that happens in chapter 16. Chapter 15 sets the stage for these 7 bowls to be poured out. All right, let's look at verse 1, where John says, "Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and amazing." So he's looking, as it were, we see him on the island of Patmos. He's having these visions where things are unveiled, and he's seeing into a deeper reality, a spiritual dimension of reality that would perhaps not be obvious to the physical eye or senses, but he is given this spiritual insight. And what he sees here, he says, again, is great and amazing. And what he sees are these 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last. Okay? For with them the wrath of God is finished. I wanted to pause right there and just talk for a few moments about this idea of wrath, because we've seen it a number of times mentioned already in the book. In fact, one of the most jarring statements to me was earlier in the 7 seals, I think, where a statement is made of who can stand before the wrath of the Lamb, right? Which is, again, a kind of you don't typically think of lambs as being wrathful creatures, but Jesus is both the ultimate victim of unjust persecution, you could say, and he is also the final judge, which is an interesting balance, maybe you could say. But here we see that he is one who is described as having wrath, and here the wrath of God is the way that it is described. Well, what is the wrath of God?
We don't want it.
Yeah, it's something that you don't want to be the object of. Very clear in the descriptions of this. You don't want to be under the wrath of God, under the judgment of God. Brian, one of the classes you talked about Jesus treading the winepress of the wrath of God Almighty.
The cup of his wrath being filled up.
Being filled up, that's right. And then the people being forced, as it were, to drink this cup. Which again, thinking of Jesus, I don't know that this is a proper juxtaposition to lay out, but I was thinking about that in the Garden of Gethsemane in his prayer. What did he ask for 3 times?
This cup to pass from me.
Yeah, this cup to pass from me. Well, what cup might that be? Was it a pleasant cup? It'd be his death on the cross. Would that be drinking a cup of wrath and judgment in some sense?
Yeah, I noticed didn't mention it Sunday, but I think it's Isaiah who makes a reference to Israel having to drink down this cup all the way to the dregs. And like you're getting at, really, Jesus, he takes all that is bad about humanity and drank it all the way down.
If we think of God's wrath then as his proper attitude toward evil, if he is a good God, then it seemed to be implied that he would also have a rather low opinion of evil, of that which mars or stands against and damages that which is good. And so it seems to me that one way to describe wrath would be it's not like a human passion of fury that we just get in an emotional outrage, and we kind of think of that as the wrath of man, which James tells us does not produce the righteousness of God. So God's wrath is something other than just him getting triggered and ticked off over something. But I think one writer described it, Leon Morris, as God's strong and settled opposition to all that is evil, a burning zeal for all that is right and good and just, and a settled hatred for all that is opposed to it. So,
On that, I think you jumped in here with words about. I'll say, I think the emotion we sometimes feel totally inappropriately, I don't think reflects this, but the emotion that I think we feel when, not just toward us, but we may even just be reading and hearing about an injustice, something that's really unjust, that gets us going.
it burns.
Yes.
Very, very much. And so as you think, again, taking that and pulling back again and bringing in Jesus in the garden, drinking the cup, and you think of all of the things that humanity rightly deserves, Jesus willingly absorbing and taking that as a judgment on our behalf and in our place. And really, as I think about the book of Revelation, we're sort of in a position to either look at that and do like the 144,000 or all the others who are described here in the book as accepting, embracing Jesus as the one who has absorbed the wrath of God on our behalf and redeemed us and brought us back into a right relationship with God, so that that wrath that could rightly rest upon us has been averted and placed upon him who suffered in our place. Or we can reject that sacrifice, and where does that put us? As continued just recipients of that wrath. So it's like sin and evil in a moral universe has to be judged. There is a rightful wrath directed toward it, and we can either accept the substitute that God has given on our behalf in Jesus, or we can reject it and drink that cup ourselves. And that seems to be part of the theme that runs throughout this book, is you have specifically a nation of people who should have, of all people, received the one who had come to absorb their rightful judgment, and instead rejecting him, now becoming the proper recipients of the wrath of God. So, and particularly, not just when they reject and crucify Jesus, their Messiah, but then after he's raised and gives his Spirit to bring life to the church, and they continue to now go after the church, his bride, and oppress and persecute the church. Now that cup of wrath has been completely filled up and will be poured out on them. All right, so he sees this sign in heaven, these 7 angels with these plagues, and God's wrath is going to be poured out in judgment, and at least as regards this event, his wrath will be finished. But then, along with that, he says that he sees what appeared to be a sea of glass. Is this the first time we've seen the sea of glass? No. Let's look again at what we're talking about here. Somebody read chapter 4, verse 6. Sterling, would you look up Exodus 24:10? Bruce, would you look up Ezekiel 1:26? And somebody read that Revelation 4:6, Carrie.
And before the throne there was a sea of glass like unto crystal.
Okay,
And in the mid-
I'm sorry.
You want the whole verse?
Go ahead.
And in the midst of the throne and round about the throne were 4 beasts full of eyes before and behind.
Very good. So this is in the Revelation 4, the throne scene of the enthroned one, the Ancient of Days, and before him or in front of him is this sea of glass. Okay, Sterling?
And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and it was like the very heavens in its clarity.
Okay. And we've talked about this before, but this is when Moses and 70 of the leaders of Israel went partway up Mount Sinai after they had sort of ratified the covenant. They went halfway up the mountain, and they ate and drank in the presence of God with this sapphire pavement above them. Sounds a lot like this idea of the sea of glass, and because on the other side of it they could sort of make out some sort of a likeness that is clearly intended to be God. But between them there's this, what do you call it when you can kind of see through something, but translucent sea of glass, or sapphire pavement as it's described there. And then Bruce, Ezekiel 1:26.
And above the expanse over their heads there was the likeness of a throne, an appearance like sapphire, and seated above the likeness of a throne was a likeness with a human appearance.
Okay, so all of these give us this same idea of there being some sea that has clarity and translucent properties with someone seated above it, God figure, and people beneath it, or it between them and God. And then I won't take the time to look it up, but in King Solomon's temple, in 1 Kings 7:23-26, are descriptions of the brass or bronze laver, and it's described there as a sea, and it's very large. I can't remember. It's like 45 feet in circumference. That's all measured around the perimeter. 45 feet. So that's it's a big thing, and that seems to, like, symbolically within the temple represent the same idea of, in the temple, in the Holy of Holies, is the throne room of God, and out before him is this sea of glass, and people have to come to it, and the priests have to cleanse themselves there before they can go forward and enter into, or closer, draw nearer to God's presence. And so here you see God on his throne over there, and then on the other side of this multitude of people who had conquered the beast and its image and the number of its name, standing beside the sea of glass. So there's people who are of this, maybe this 144,000, this innumerable multitude, however we want to describe it, who are there before the presence of God, maybe below or on the other side of this sea of glass, but they're there. And how, and also notice that the sea of glass here is described a little bit differently. What is a feature about it that you notice?
It's mingled with fire.
Yeah, it's mingled with fire. What might that signify? If this is something maybe that a person, this is just my conjecture, if this is something a person has to cross in order to come into the presence of God, what do we typically think of fire is doing?
It does two things I think are noteworthy. It purifies, but it also burns. It's the tribulations, the suffering you have to go through, and it's a process by which you're purified and made suitable to be in the presence of God.
Exactly. Couldn't make it any plainer than that. Maybe this is like their baptism of fire. They've come through this great tribulation, and now they are able to approach the one seated on the throne. So they're there, they've conquered, they've overcome the beast, its image and its number. They've been sealed on their foreheads, as it were, with the name of God. And so they stand beside the sea of glass with the harps of God in their hands, and they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb. So we've made some sense, I think, of the sea of glass, but let's think a little bit more about these people who are standing beside the sea. They're not specifically mentioned here as the 144,000, but I think clearly that's who we're talking about. And going back and getting a little bit of review of who they are, they were introduced to us in chapter 7, I believe. And is 144,000, is this number like any other number in Revelation? Is it a statistic or is it a symbol? It's a symbol, right? Yeah. So it's 12 times 12 times 10 times 10 times 10, 10 cubed. 12 times 12, 144, perhaps representative of the apostles and the 12 patriarchs, but then amplified by 10 would be a whole lot, by another 10 would be a whole lot, but another 10 and you've got a multitude. And which is interesting because in chapter 7, after he goes through and describes these 12,000 sealed from each of these tribes of Israel, it says in verse 9 that after this he says, I looked and behold, what?
A multitude nobody can number.
Yeah. So, he hears 144,000, but when he looks, he just sees a multitude that nobody can number, which again, I think suggests that it's a symbolic number of vast size and not to be taken as a literal statistic. And it's made up of people of every nation, tribe, and language. And they are coming before the throne of the Lamb. They're clothed in white clothes, and they are singing salvation songs there in chapter 7. In verse 13 and 14, it says that when the elders addressed me, saying, "Who are these clothed in the white robes, and where have they come from?" And I said to him, "Sir, you know." And he said to me, "These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. And they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. And therefore they are standing before the throne and praising and singing praises to the one who has redeemed them and brought them through the great tribulation, this baptism of fire that they have passed through." They're again mentioned from last week's study in chapter 14, and look at verses 1 through 5, where they're designated as having, they're standing here, they're seen standing on Mount Zion. They have his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. The sound of the roar of thunder and many waters. They're singing a new song that no one could learn except for the 144,000 who have been redeemed from the earth. Salvation songs don't make any sense to someone who hasn't experienced the salvation, right? It's like, I think there's a lot of people in the world that just think it's just the weirdest thing that people get together every Sunday and sing these songs that we sing every Sunday. That just seems rather bizarre. But, once you experience what it is to know the Lord's salvation, all you want to do is sing his praise. And so no one knows the song except for those who have been redeemed. He goes on to describe them as having been redeemed from the earth. They've been ransomed and purchased. They're not defiled by false worship. I think that's the idea. They're virgins. They haven't been with women. They haven't followed into the adulterous ways of Jezebel, to use an expression from earlier in the book, or the great harlot that comes later. They're loyal disciples. It says they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. And they are the first fruits of mankind. They're only at the beginning, and there is no lie found in their mouth. And I think that probably has specific reference to their steadfast determination to confess Jesus as Lord, even under the pain of denying him, maybe. So that's who this multitude is that's standing beside the fiery sea of glass. That I think the idea, again, they've come through this fiery trial and tribulation. Moses, we'll get to that in a moment. Let's go ahead and look at what they sing. We see that they're singing this song, but it tells us what they sing in the latter part of verse 3 and verse 4. "Great and amazing are your deeds, O Lord God the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations, who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify your name. For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship you, for your righteous acts have been revealed." There are many reasons why people come to God. It's often through the grace and kindness that they perceive in Christ, or through the service that Christians provide and the kindness that they extend to them. But there's the other side of the coin as well. At times people can also see the justice that God measures out, as over and over, evil has a way of building itself up, puffing itself up, becoming greater and greater and more oppressive until what? And it looks like it's just undefeatable. And then what happens? It just over and over. The kingdoms of this earth topple and they're brought low. And it becomes evident to those who watch that There is a judgment that has fallen on evil. And it almost seems that God allows it to gather its strength. For this reason, God tells Pharaoh, I have allowed you to become who you are, to grow as great as you have, so that as your evil and power have increased, now I can reveal my greater power over you and show that, in contrast to your unjust ways, that I am a just God. So, what do we know about the people? Well, how did the judgment on Egypt affect the people of Canaan when they heard the news of what had happened to Egypt through the 10 plagues?
Well, they straightened up for a while.
Okay, some of them straightened up, but it caused them to have great, what? Does anybody remember?
Generosity, they were giving.
Yeah, some of them were generous and helpful. They decided, hey, God is on these people's side. We better help. Others just were in fear and trembling. And when they come to the first city that they're going to conquer in the land, the city of Jericho, what happens?
They're all locked up inside.
They're all locked up inside. Here's what I'm looking for. I'm sorry. Nobody can answer the question. You know your teacher's not asking. Huh?
You've heard of the Rahab's comments?
Yes. What does Rahab do?
They had heard of what had happened in Egypt. She's explained to them and said, we are terrified of that and what's going to happen to us, essentially.
Yes. And so she does what?
She changed sides.
She switches sides. She says, I want to be on your side. And so when people see the amazing deeds of the Lord God Almighty, that He's true to His ways, and that He brings judgment on the wicked, it does cause people to come to Him and to worship Him as His righteous acts are revealed in history. One of the things that struck me, and I don't know why I thought of this, because I actually liked the movie. I remember watching it with our kids several times when they were small, and especially the scene where they're crossing the Red Sea. I don't know if it's Disney or who did the Prince of Egypt. But I think about the difference between the actual song that is sung by Moses in Exodus 15, or this description of God as the great deliverer, and the song that was in the story of the Prince of Egypt. So again, just take a quick look at that. And then contrast it with this. There can be miracles when you believe. Though hope is frail, it's hard to kill. Who knows what miracles you can achieve when you believe? Somehow you will when you believe. What's the main difference that you notice between these two?
It's about God, or it's about you.
One's about God, one's about you. The word you is used in both, but once the reference is to God, the other is just, when we really believe, and you almost get that sense when we really believe in ourselves, or almost it's, as somebody has described, the idea of having faith in faith. And a few weeks ago, I think I talked about, a little faith in a big God will get you a lot further than a lot of faith in a little God. And when you read the story of Exodus, it wasn't the people ginning up their own faith to finally accomplish miracles. It was the great mercy and justice and righteousness of God that brought them out of Egypt and through the sea. All right, well, so they sing this song of Moses and the Lamb. It says, where is it? They sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb. Why do you think that he places these two songs side by side? I mean, there's a lot of songs in the Bible and in the Old Testament included. Why the Song of Moses? And again, it's in Exodus 15.
There's an interesting thing going on here where they're crossing that barrier because Moses led the people across this Red Sea and then again the Jordan River into the Promised Land. But you had this barrier in both stories. But this time it's praising the Lamb who's leading them across this barrier.
Yes, exactly. What else can you think of as similarities or reasons for this? I think that's the number one.
Moses was leading them to the promised land. Christ is leading us to his promised land.
Okay, very good.
I mean, I think the creation of a new nation, I mean, even though they were around when Moses came to this, never really, I think, it seems like formalizes a nation.
Okay.
And Jesus is formalizing this newer nation of Christianity.
Okay, very good.
The 24 elders seem to be symbolic of the 12 and the 12.
Okay. Yeah. Things that I wrote, I think all of those are exactly right. Both celebrate God's salvation through the destruction of their oppressors. Both recognize an immediate enemy, who would be the immediate enemy in the Egypt, in Moses' story. Egypt and I'm sorry, Egypt and Pharaoh, right, and embodied as its head. What would be the immediate enemy in this story? The temple, the apostate Judaism and imperial Rome would all fall into that category. But does the Exodus story recognize a deeper enemy, if you will, a less immediate but more significant enemy than Pharaoh and the Egyptians? I think he does. Yeah. Exodus 15, where we have the Song of Moses, it says, as he's going through celebrating the victory that God's given them over their enemies, he comes down, I'll start verse 10. You blew with your wind, the sea covered them, they sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders? So they recognize that this was a battle not just between Israel and Pharaoh, Israel and Egypt and Moses and Pharaoh, but between the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the gods of the Egyptians. And when you look at the 10 plagues, I'm sure most of you have done a study of this, you see that each of those plagues is sort of a judgment on various deities that the Egyptians worshiped. So there's a clear clash of gods taking place in the Exodus story. And we're seeing the same thing in the book of Revelation, even though the proximate enemies are Rome and Nero and the apostate Judaism and the high priest and the persecuting entities of Judaism against the church, and all of that is right up in their face. We've seen this deeper story that Revelation is trying to show us of behind the beasts and the harlot is the dragon, right? That serpent of old. So lots of really interesting parallels there. And as was pointed out a moment ago, just as Israel passed through the tribulation of slavery and crossing the sea, being baptized into Moses, as it says in 1 Corinthians 10, so this 144,000 have passed through the great tribulation, their trial under persecution, to stand beside the sea, having been baptized in fire.
They're also trying to bridge the two metaphors. They're also passing a distance nobody has passed before. So they're going through the translucent sea where that's never been possible. So
Okay.
the elders stopped, Ezekiel stopped. You could only get so far close to the temple, but they're passing through a fire that nobody has passed through
Okay.
to go to a place that nobody thought was possible to get to.
Okay. Very good.
So it's
Only God can make a way where there was no way, and He has done this and done it in the most stunning way through the blood of the Lamb who made it possible. Very good. All right. Let's look at verses 5 through 8 then. After this, I looked, and the sanctuary of the tent of witness in heaven was open. What's that? The sanctuary of the tent of witness in heaven was open. What's the tent of witness? What's that referring to? Yeah, the temple of the tabernacle, and why would it be called tent of witness, the word witness?
Display of God's presence, display of who He is.
Display of God's presence there, yes.
The tablet's been handed down.
Yeah, the Ten Commandments that were given to Moses were placed where? In the Ark of the Covenant, okay? And it's, this is the throne of the king with the covenant and the law of the covenant there put before everyone, God and the people who meet together in this place. Nations of the people are to the God who has delivered them. And the idea of that flows out of that in Exodus and into Deuteronomy is God constantly promising the people blessing for obedience, that they will flourish and thrive in the land and remain in the land from generation to generation, and they will just feel like they are being hunted down by God's blessing everywhere they turn. But if they reject the covenant and turn specifically away from the first covenant and go and serve other gods, what does God's covenant promise? Instead of blessing, cursing. And as he told them, you will be blessed in the field, you'll be blessed in your house, you'll be blessed all over the place. Now he says, you will be cursed. And so I think the idea of God being witness to all of this, his presence there, his law there, this is the witness of heaven against the people. And now this is open. And a lot of times in Revelation, we're seeing it open so that John and then us through John can look up and see into the glories of what's taking place there. But why is it mentioned here that it's open?
This is going to sound like a good analogy, but in my military days, it was in Operation Desert Storm. You know, Iraq had invaded Kuwait, and of course there's a Hardback Cafe in every big city, right? Well, there were t-shirts going around at the time that said, Hardback Cafe, Kuwait City closed for business, Hardback Cafe, Baghdad opening soon. And what they didn't tell you is those saints standing on the Sea of Glass were wearing t-shirts, and they said Hardback Cafe, well, they said Temple in Jerusalem, Old Jerusalem closed for business, but the one in heaven is opening soon.
Okay, very good. So that's exactly right. The shadow in Jerusalem is shutting down, and God's going to make a way for people to come and draw near to God in the real heavenly tabernacle. Well, here, why is it being opened? Is it being opened so that we can come up and come in, which is certainly a right way of thinking, but what's the focal point here?
Angels coming out.
Yeah, it's opened up so these angels can come out, and they're coming out, and it's going to be ugly. They come out of the sanctuary, 7 angels with the 7 plagues, clothed in pure bright linen, with golden sashes around their chest. And one of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And the sanctuary, it's forever. His wrath is forever and ever against evil. The wrath of the beast flares up and dies out when it's taken out of the way, but the wrath of God remains against evil. It doesn't ever change. So again, I think it's an interesting thing for anyone to contemplate, whether they're deciding which side they want to be on. But the sanctuary was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one could enter the sanctuary until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were finished. There's a number of places where it's mentioned that God's glory filled the temple and people were unable to go in and out as a result. In Exodus 40, when the tabernacle is finished, the smoke fills the temple for a period of time, and the priests, nobody could go in. And then at the dedication of Solomon's temple. The same thing happens in 2 Chronicles 7. But here, I think the idea is that intercession maybe is no longer possible on behalf of the city that's been set apart for destruction. And we're in a situation now where there will be no more seals signaling something dreadful is coming, no more trumpets heralding an approaching doom, but now the judgment on an apostate Judaism is come, and there's nothing anybody can do to stop it. One other thing that I noticed, and this is the best I can make of it, people have asked, I've had several people ask about the fractions that we've seen already in the book with the 7 seals. It talked about a fourth of this, that, and the other was killed or devastated by the seals as the seals were opened. And then when you move to the trumpets, what was the fraction? A third. Now, which is bigger, a fourth or a third? Yeah, some of you guys are really good at your math. Third is bigger, so it's a growing percentage that's affected by these judgments. When we get to these bowls of wrath, what's the fraction? Not that you would know unless you've been reading ahead, but in chapter 16, does he use any fractions?
On Sunday's turf.
That's right. It's like, it's a whole number now, okay? There's no fraction. So again, I think my points there is just simply saying that we're seeing an increasing intensity and impact as he moves through the book. All right. Okay. Well, that's what I have on chapter 15. Any questions or comments on anything there? If there isn't, I've got one other thing I can throw at you. It's really not throwing at you anything new. Does anybody want to do this?
One of the things you talked about recently that, I think sometimes people just sort of, sometimes we pass over things that are right in front of us. It's almost too obvious. And here, this temple imagery that just runs through the book, and you just mentioned it here. Sure, could this have been written about things happened in the 90s or 2050 AD or whatever? But it certainly has more grip to it. If you think about this tension between this closing down, this earthly temple, and this emergence, and all these sights coming out of the heavenly temple.
Yeah. Why, if it's not talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple and the complex there, then why this just so constant imagery of it? That's a good point. Well, the other closing thought that I would just leave you with is, again, the thing that I'm drawing out of this more and more is worship is inevitable. You're going to worship something, someone. It's either going to be the beast or it's going to be the real thing. And he's just laying out reasons for us over and over again to make a good choice. Whom shall you fear? Whom shall you trust? Who shall you worship? Thank you, guys.